And could I ask everybody, thank you. If I can ask everybody to keep their cameras off and their microphones on mute, that would be very helpful so we don't get any extraneous noise. Okay, next slide, please. So what are our objectives for today? And you can see bulleted there. And that's basically to provide you with an understanding of DataCan's work with industry, the NHS and academia. Secondly, to discuss how involvement of patients, carers and their relatives can make a genuine difference to, and does make a genuine difference, in fact, to DataCan and its customers. But thirdly, and most importantly, it's to highlight areas where we can work together with you in the future to explore how health data can make a difference to cancer care services and therefore patients. Okay, thank you very much. So please don't worry about screen scraping the slides, by the way, or hastily jotting them down. We're happy to send copies of them out to you upon request in the next few days. And hopefully that enables you to sort of listen a little bit more and not be distracted. Okay, so next slide, please. So how are we going to achieve those objectives? Well, I'm not going to go through this line by line here, but you get an idea of what's involved. We're going to take the next 90 minutes to go through this. And please note there are 2 question and answer sessions that we're going to have of 10 minutes each. And we very much welcome your thoughts, comments and questions. So please do use the chat function to raise those questions and we'll be delighted to address those. Additionally, we also have some of our speakers on standby to respond to your questions if we feel the answer's a short one. So that'll be great. Okay, well, thank you very much indeed for that. Let me first of all introduce then Dr. Charlie Davey, the DataCan Hub Director, who's going to provide you with an overview of the hub and our story so far. So Charlie, over to you.
Thanks very much, Pete. So yeah, I'm Charlie Davey. I'm an NHS clinician and I'm Hub Director for DataCan. And DataCan is a UK-wide data research hub specific for cancer. It was founded in October 2019. The founding partners, including UCL partners, include Genomics England, Leeds Teaching Hospital, University of Leeds, Queen's University Belfast, and also a commercial partner, IQVIA. And our purpose when we set up DataCan was largely to improve outcomes for patients. Next slide, please. And we are doing that really by making cancer data better quality and also more accessible and visible for researchers and for other health professionals. And working across the United Kingdom, we've been able to work closely with HDR UK in making data sets more accessible through the HDR UK Innovation Gateway. Like many organisations, we've also been working around COVID response, and that highlighted to us the need for more real-time data for cancer to look at direct and indirect effects, for example, in COVID. But equally, we work with patients, and probably one of the things that we're most proud of at DataCan is that our patient and public involvement strategy runs throughout the whole of DataCan, and we'll hear more about that later on. Next slide, please. So we are very keen that we make it as easy as possible for researchers to find the data that they need as easily and as efficiently as possible. We at DataCan are not data controllers per se, so we act as intermediaries amongst researchers, commercial partners and others. And we also work to try to support a number of cancer data networks, which includes IQVIA's Cancer Data Network to improve the use of cancer data throughout NHS trusts, and also a real-time data network run by DataCan. Next slide, please. To do this effectively, we've had to work closely with many organisations, some of which are listed here. We work closely with many of the cancer charities, many of the universities, and also a number of the organisations that link us to industry partners, both large industry partners and SMEs. Next slide, please. It's important that we're able to demonstrate fair value on the use of data, which we're largely using as aggregated anonymized data. And we work either with specific projects with researchers or with clinicians and patients around improving pathways of care or introducing new diagnostics or medicines. We've worked quite significantly around policy development, and Mark will talk about some of the work that we've done in our response to COVID. Next slide, please. But we continue to grow and are very keen to extend our partnership both locally, nationally and internationally. We've extended our partnership now to include Exeter University and Edinburgh University, who are shortly about to join. Monica, our data lead, will talk about the work that we've done with trusted research environments, which we see as an important avenue going forward. And we also work with a number of the cancer alliances across England and interact with organisations that can link us to SME and industry bodies and are working regionally around a number of data strategies, including a One London data strategy. So that's a brief summary of some of the work that we've done to date and some of the opportunities that we're keen to explore through this webinar. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Charlie. And next, we're going to hear from three people, basically for three case studies. And over the next 30 minutes, we want to describe three examples which highlight just some of the work that Data Can has done so far. So over to you, Mark.
And just need to be allowed to share the screen. Thank you. Can you see that okay?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay. For me, COVID-19 was personal. My uncle died of a COVID-19 related illness on the 29th of March 2020. And one of my colleagues, Edward Vidoliak, who's an oncologist in Croatia, reached out to me to sympathize with me on my loss. But he also said to me this chilling statement: people are starting to fear a COVID-19 diagnosis more than a cancer diagnosis. However, there was very little evidence available at that time to either support or refute this statement. So we started a data-driven collaboration with partners in University College London to do two things. One, to look at real-time data from hospital trusts across the UK, and also to model excess deaths due to the adverse effects of COVID-19.
Sorry, Mark, can you share your slides again for us, please?
Okay.
Thanks, Mark.
Okay, can you see that okay? So two things we looked at to really look at the effect of the pandemic on cancer and cancer patients. First was looking at 2-week waits in terms of the early warning system for suspicion of cancer. And we found that 7 out of 10, yes, that figure is correct, 7 out of 10 people who had suspicion of cancer were not getting referred to their specialist services. We secondly looked at chemotherapy attendances, which is really a measure of the health of the cancer treatment service, and again found this very significant impact. 4 out of 10 cancer patients not getting access to their chemotherapy. And the disruption was really seen right across the cancer pathway. So in terms of presentation, in terms of diagnosis, and in terms of impact on treatment. There was also a very significant disruption of cancer research, both in relation to clinical trials, but also in relation to discovery research. We then looked to see, well, what was the impact or potential impact on mortality, so excess death in people with cancer. And we looked at a database of nearly 4 million citizens through a linked primary and secondary data set, looked at different scenarios. And the net result was that between 7 and 18,000 excess deaths could occur due to the indirect impact of the pandemic and lockdown. We also looked to see what was the effect of comorbidities, i.e. additional underlying health conditions. And we found that cardiovascular disease, hypertension, obesity, diabetes, and COPD could give additional risk of excess deaths. So if we look at this, we really see that the impact can be very significant, particularly if we look at it in the context of 5-year anticipated survival. So you can see there in the 3 graphs I've shown there for both lung and for breast, but particularly for colorectal, we may be setting back 5-year survival rates for colorectal cancer nearly a decade. And these results were shared with our government and the 4 chief medical officers pre-submission. I can see here the influence and impact that it had right across the research community, the media, but also presenting it to the Cabinet Office itself. Also, what we found was that we could use data to help us to support the recovery. So having highlighted what the issues were, we could also look at ways in which we can use data really to help us, particularly in colorectal cancer, looking at ways in which we can prioritize the use of, for example, fecal immunochemical testing, can avoid very significant numbers of these excess deaths that I highlighted, and also have impacts in relation to supporting the prioritization to solve capacity problems within the health service. However, we still have a problem. What you can see here is data that was collected nationally to look to see, yes, we do see recovery, but not for all different cancers. So some cancers, for example, lung, we only see 67% recovery. Similarly, in data from Leeds generated through Jeff Hall's team, you can see here significant issue in relation to that recovery. And also that we may be missing as many as 1,400 misdiagnoses in Leeds, which translates into approximately 85,000 potential missing diagnoses in the UK. We also looked with colleagues in University College London at the impact on procedures such as endoscopies. This data was just published recently in Lancet Gastroenterology and Hepatology, and again showing impact of 500,000 delays in endoscopy. And this work was done with Lawrence Lovett and Conor Ho in the University College London. We also realized that this is not just happening in the UK. COVID-19, like cancer, unfortunately doesn't respect national borders. We presented our data to the European Cancer Organization, which is Europe's largest multi-professional cancer organization, also presented it to WHO Europe. And the European Cancer Organization immediately invited us to help chair a special network on COVID-19 and cancer. And we launched a 7-point plan for COVID-19 and cancer at the opening session of the European Cancer Organization Summit last November. Here is that 7-point plan to build back both better and smarter. So addressing the cancer backlog, restoring confidence in citizens in cancer health services, tackling shortages, looking at cancer workforce gaps, strengthening cancer systems, this rapid deployment of cancer intelligence that I already showed you in relation to that real-time data that we generated. But overall, cancer must not become the forgotten sea in the fight against COVID-19. Just recently, we've looked pan-Europe at data, and again, the situation is really serious. So if you look in relation to, for example, cancer screening, you can see 100 million, yes, that's a correct number, 100 million cancer screening tests were not performed in Europe as a result of the pandemic. 1 million cancer patients going around who have not yet been diagnosed across Europe. Impact on treatment, as I indicated before, impact on patients and them being worried in relation to attending screening appointments, but also impact in relation to the cancer workforce, with 4 out of 10 feeling burnout, 3 out of 10 showing signs of clinical depression. This has prompted us to launch the Time to Act campaign. You can see it behind me there as well as on this slide, so that we don't let COVID-19 stop us from tackling cancer. 3 key messages in this Time to Act campaign. First, in relation to cancer patients and citizens, really don't delay. See your doctor if you have warning signs. So for example, a lump in your breast, difficulty breathing, difficulty swallowing, blood in your pee or your poo, unwarranted weight loss. So really go to your doctor, and also to emphasize that cancer services are safe to go to. For health professionals, to support them. They're not alone in this. Obviously, they've had a Herculean efforts that they've done in relation to combating the COVID pandemic. We need to support them. And finally, the stark message to policymakers, health system leaders and governments: cancer must be on top of the agenda. We really need to address that cancer backlog now to help us save lives. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark. Some stunning figures there. Right, next we've got Monica Jones, who's the DataCan Chief Data Officer, who's going to tell us about the next major development in accessing data cancer, something she's been working on for a while. In a presentation, as you can see there, called Improving Quality and Access to Cancer Data, including through a national cancer trusted research environment. Monica, over to you.
Thanks very much, Pete, and thanks, Mark, for that excellent presentation. So next slide, please. So what I want to describe over the next 7 minutes is how we have been, in meeting the aims of HDI UK, which is absolutely around uniting the UK's health data to make discoveries that improve people's lives. And we've seen some fantastic examples from Mark there. So as DataCan, we actually sort of sit in the middle here as one of the health data research hubs between the UK Health Research Alliance, predominantly NHS organisations, but other national organisations that is bringing together people who want to be able to sort of share data for research, but also then to be able to present that through the Health Data Research Innovation Gateway, which has its first birthday today, I believe, to discover, de-identify, link, access, and analyse sort of data. Underpinned, of course, by patient and public benefit and the trustworthiness of the data. Next, please. So from a data perspective, this is very much our DataCan vision. Cancer is a complex disease, and you can see there from the graphic that there are a whole host of things that need to come together. Very importantly, of course, putting the patient in the middle of bringing together that clinical data, the radiology, the pathology, genetic and molecular. So what we have been doing over the last 18 months is absolutely about improving access to existing data, improving the quality of the data, improving the UK coverage. So we are a UK-wide organisation, and it's not just but English focused, and adding new data sets at scale, which will be the focus over the next year, particularly around genetic, molecular imaging and pathology data, and primary care data and patient-reported outcomes. Next. So this is looks like a very techie slide, but one of the things that we've been doing over the last 18 months is actually taking some large, well-curated data sets and actually putting those onto the gateway so that they are publicly available. And that, means that we've actually got to describe that against the metadata specification. I was also very closely involved in the development of the utility framework so that we can actually see how useful data sets are. And there's a rating of bronze, gold, silver and platinum. And I'm pleased to report that all DataCan data sets are either gold or platinum. And I've got a couple of screenshots there that actually shows that, which means that actually they are of the highest quality and hence have that level of usefulness. Next, please. So what I want to talk about now is the NHS Digital's trusted research environment for England, providing researchers with access to essential linked de-identified data to quickly answer COVID-19 related questions. So this is something that came out of the work that was done reporting to SAGE, but also recognizing that actually those data sets that once they became available could actually have other purposes and other applicability. So as DataCan, we were asked by HDI UK to lead on this work, and we've been pulling together all of our resources to make this happen over the last few months. Next, please. So this diagram basically describes that in terms of the types of data. So we've got routinely collected data sets, such as hospital episode statistics that people will be familiar with, the secondary uses service, some of the national cancer data sets, so the national cancer registration data, the chemotherapy data sets and radiotherapy, and those are all being brought into the NHS Digital Trusted Research Environment, which is a cloud-based platform, but also specifically the COVID-19 related data sets. So things like the Pillar 1 testing for healthcare professionals and people sort of within hospital, and then the Pillar 2 testing, which are those people out in the community, and that sort of broader testing. We've also got the opportunity for medication, primary care, planning and pandemic sort of data, and a lot of the additional information governance approvals around sharing that data for the important understanding for the not only tackling the pandemic but for the recovery. Then there are a number of approved researchers, of which DataCan is the second. The first one is the cardiovascular hub. So they already have access to cardiovascular data, and we very soon will have that. We've got our data sharing agreements all approved now, and literally any day now we should be getting our logons and getting into the system. Next, please. So what will that actually provide for us? It very importantly, we need to make sure that actually there is the appropriate information governance all around that, and all trusted research environments fit in with the 5 Safes framework, which has been developed once again sort of by HDR UK colleagues and the broader community. Researchers only gain access to the data that they're permitted when those requests are fulfilled, are published on the data release register. Next, please. So in terms of the roadmap to these selected deliverables, there's a whole set of things, as you might imagine, for such a large collection of sort of national data, particularly around understanding the code versions, the sort of the safe import, the platform migration, and a whole host of stakeholder engagement. The data acquisition has been happening sort of already and is happening in tranches. So we will have 2 tranches in terms of the data that DataCan will be have access to. And the data sharing agreements initially are between Leeds Teaching Hospital Trust and the University of Leeds as 2 of the founding partners of DataCan, but there is an expectation that in the future we'll be able to extend that to other partners. There's a whole host of data curation and sort of efficiency initiatives that will be happening over the next sort of 6 to 9 months, but we're very proud to be, you know, at the forefront of this and see it very much as a collaborative arrangement, and that we know a lot about cancer research and the you know what data is required, and helping our colleagues sort of in the national sort of level to understand what researchers really need is a great opportunity. Next, please. So finally, this is the projected data availability. I won't dwell on this in the interests of time. Colleagues will be able to get the data, but you can see there's a whole host of those that will be coming online over the next sort of few months, and I've mentioned a number of those already. Next, please. So we've set up a program of work in order to do this. We've got 3 work packages. Obviously, I will be leading along with our scientific director, Mark, who you just had a presentation from, and the coordination of that overall program of work. The work package 2 is around the analysis. So we have a data scientist, Zach Welshman, and Professor Jeff Hall, who's not only Professor of Digital Health at University of Leeds, but also the Chief Clinical Officer at Leeds Teaching Hospital Trust, who will be, providing that clinical direction and input. And then very importantly, the public, patient and involvement and communications led by Chris Carrigan and our comms lead, Joanna Klassen. So that's, very much the mantra of how we do things at DataCan, making sure that everything is clear and visible and accessible. Next, please. And the final slide just takes us through the 5 initial pieces of work, very much building on what Mark said and the work that we did previously. We absolutely want to do a robust evaluation of the trusted research environment, looking at the indirect impact of COVID-19 on cancer, influence and associations of cancer on COVID outcomes, the influence and association of cancer risk factors and cancer medications, and then the direct impact of COVID-19 on cancer occurrence. So this is what we'll be doing initially, but that doesn't mean that in the future we'll be able to extend that to other sort of scenarios and working on cancer data more generally. So thanks very much. That's all I wanted to cover, and I shall hand back to Pete.
Thank you very much indeed, Monica. Just before we move on to our next presentation, I can just remind you, please do raise your questions via the chat function. That'd be greatly appreciated. And now it's time, finally, but certainly not least, for James Peach, who's our DataCan Commercial Director, with his presentation, Working with Industry and Examples. Thank you. Over to you, James.
Thanks very much, Pete, and thanks everyone for their patience as we work through our kind of presentations. There is time for questions. We're really looking forward to hearing what you have to say and how you might be interested in working with us. So really this case study comes in the context that it has historically not been particularly easy for industry to work in patient-approved commercial data access in the UK. And that in part is why we set up DataCan. We wanted to work with data controllers and data researchers to make this easier. And I hope we'll be able to show that in a couple of cases, we've made that happen and we want to do more of that. Particularly what's been really vital to us has been that because commercial access to NHS data is a divisive topic, we have made sure that patients have the authority to approve and stop any commercial work that we do. So enormous thanks to Pete, to Jackie, and to all the other members of the PPIE group who I work with on a very close basis to make sure that all work we do with industry is patient approved. Next slide, please. And this is an example of a patient-approved piece of work we've done with industry. This is with, obviously, Roche, the big pharma company, and we were looking at early triple-negative breast cancer outcomes. And at the top, you've got a quote there from Jackie. We take, like I said, we take all of our proposals before we start doing the work to the patient group, and the feedback from the patient group was a resounding get on with this. You need to do this. This is not a this is a difficult cancer type. Outcomes are poor. If there's a way we can help, we absolutely must do that. It was motivating to have that feedback from the patient group because we were ourselves very worried whether we would be able to deliver this on time. The time frames were very short. We need to really pull together both information governance, the analytical teams, all the rest of that. So huge thanks to the team that actually delivered this on the ground. So Davneet Judge of Roche, Phil Waywell of DataCan, Jeff Hall and Sue Cheeseman in Leeds, and Peter Hall and his team up in Edinburgh. It would not have been possible without them, so huge thanks. In terms of what we actually did, what we were trying to understand is what are the outcomes for patients presenting in the NHS with early triple negative breast cancer. And you can do that through the national data sets, as Monica has demonstrated through the trusted research environment. But what we wanted was to go to a level of quality higher than that, which involved specialized data curators and clinicians looking at the data, looking at the case notes and making sure the data quality was really good enough so that our analyses were robust. So when Roche came to us, and we've been talking to them for a long while about a range of projects, with this potential one, initially we spent a lot of time working with Peter Hall as a breast cancer specialist and the curation and data teams up in Leeds to really understand, is this feasible? What is the protocol? How does the general question that Roche has fit with the data items, data services, and the quality of curation that we can do within the UK? And this is in 2 sites, Leeds and Edinburgh, so really quite representative, and particularly across 2 of the UK countries. So we did that feasibility assessment, and that led to a period of relatively intensive data curation, effectively, to get the data up to the quality required for this study. And just to give an idea of the scale of patient population we were working across, total patient population of 4.5 million, effectively, Cashman coming in. So a reasonably good approximation of the UK population. Once we'd curated that data, we then extracted that to a single data model that had been designed for this study, and then linked that data, once it was anonymous, in a secure environment up in Edinburgh. And then, of course, the analysis of the results. And those of you who've done data science before will know that steps 2 and 3 take almost all of the work. So once you've got the data in the right place and you've worked out the protocol, you can then run it and you write the report. So we did the results and presentation and discussion with the Ross scientists, including Kaplan-Meier survival curves and the rest. The great thing, and this comes back to a data kind of belief, that all data and insights are available both for academic research and clinical care. And it was a lovely, lovely moment about, I think, 10 days after the project had delivered, when we got the call from the breast team in Leeds saying, can we have a look at this data? Because that's exactly what we want to do here, is to both deliver on the industry needs for understanding how their drug may or may not help patients, but also the clinical teams on the ground about what's going on. So work was funded by Roche, like I said, patient approved and delivered by ourselves. Next slide, please. This is another piece of work we did with Flatiron Health. It's a global specialist cancer data organization. You'll hear a little bit more about them later. But they are moving into the UK. They've been very successful in the US. They're moving into the UK. And so they came to DataCan as specialists of both cancer data and also the ability to talk to patients and engage a group of patients around a particular idea. And so Flatiron asked us to look at their value proposition from 3 points of view: the patient point of view, the clinical point of view, and the commercial proposition. And on the right, you have the patient group that we pulled together to look at the patient angle of their value proposition. And patients were absolutely at the heart of this. We had a number of sessions, both initially to really get an understanding of what Flatiron was, how data is used in the NHS and those sort of things, and then more to the specific points within what Flatiron was proposing and what the patients thought of that. And came together in a final report with a number of areas where Flatiron could continue to refine its thoughts in the UK and specific recommendations. And I'm really delighted, not only that we got such significant patient input to this, but actually that it was useful to Flatiron, and Flatiron listened to this. And I think you'll hear from Flatiron later on in the session. So what I've tried to give you there is one example of a kind of classic data analysis project, and the second one more of an advisory one, but both of them with the patient view really at the heart of it. Next slide, please. So what have we learned from our first kind of year and a half, and what would we really like to do in working with industry and indeed with many other partners? The first thing, we know this for sure because one of our partners is IQVIA, which is one of the great global CROs, is that interfaces with hubs won't really feel like interfaces with CROs, for good or for bad. We are much less used to industry working. We're much more rooted in the NHS, and what that meant is that for our customers, there's much less of a kind of client handling side. But on the positive side, there's much more of the integration with the clinical expertise and the data on the ground. So it will be different. We think it's still good and useful. And certainly we don't want to be a big CRO. We're different in that way. Second thought is really that patient involvement in cancer data research is certainly possible. And thanks again to Pete, Jackie, all of the patients who have given their time to review the documents and be part of the various project boards and the rest of those to make sure their views are heard. And it is the only way to do this properly. You'll find that the industry doesn't want us to do things hidden away from patients or in any way non-transparently. They want to be reassured that DataCan can ensure that patients really are at the heart of what we're doing. We found really that longer term partnerships or collaborations have been much more helpful. So throwing over a request for proposals designed for a kind of large CRO is probably not the most helpful way of working with us. So please come and talk to us earlier, understand what we can and can't do, and we can understand what you really need to do, and we can build that trust to deliver. We do have issues in that the NHS does continue to self-compete on data services. You will get little bits of it will pop up and say, I think I can do this better, I can do this worse. We're doing our best to avoid that by handing people on to, for example, the Genomics Medicine Service Research Collaborative, or to the National Cancer Research and Analytics Service, really trying to signal and signpost in areas when we can't really do it ourselves. The other thing is the NHS, as you know, does go through organisational shifts, and that does make it difficult at occasional times. So I mentioned the cancer registries, they're just moving from PHE into NHS Digital, which means capacity is constrained at certain times. But just be thoughtful, do listen, and do help us to help you, really. Because we believe that the data and the services that we can do are sufficiently valuable to make this worthwhile. And when I say sustainable, that is that the services that we think we can do around cancer data are so valuable that we can bring the money back into the NHS system to improve that underlying data and help patients. So I think industry work is really important to patient impact, and we can do a lot more of it if we can deliver this at high quality. So what we really need in terms of industry people working with us, first bit is around the collaborative working. It's much more helpful if you spend a bit of time getting to know us and know that we are different from the other organisations that are out there. There are certain things we will probably do worse, but there are some things which I believe we can really do better. And it's having those long-term planning and conversations that's been really helpful in identifying those sweet spots. The second thought is do walk before you run on this. If there is a very, very difficult project that requires significant export of identifiable data outside the European Union or the UK, it's going to be incredibly difficult to do that stuff. There are some things which we can do, which we know the patients approve of. We've got the delivery mechanism to do that. So let's walk before we run on this one. And do help us help you. And I hope that in this session, in the Q&A, please do tell us what you want. Please do tell us the bits that we're not doing that you think we should be doing. And if we do things less well than you're expecting, please do tell us. So I think we've been really lucky so far to have good quality collaborative partners such as Flatiron and Roche, who we've been able to work with on delivering patient approved industrial research. And I'm really looking forward to more of this. And looking forward also to the PPI session with Pete and the rest after this. So Pete, back to you, and thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you very much indeed, James. Okay, so it's now time for questions and answers for 10 minutes, and we've got a couple in, and I know Monica has answered a few in the chat, so that's great. Let's start off a question with Mark, if we may. In fact, two questions. First question would be, can you underline the current DataCan capabilities as demonstrated by your case study? What are they? And then also, secondly, a question from Edward Goodall, which is, what's the current situation in Northern Ireland with regard to the important initiatives that you outlined in your presentation, Mark?
Thanks very much, Pete. Just the first question first, in terms of the sort of type of capabilities, I think you've seen, from the work that we've already presented, that it's really important that getting access to data in a timely fashion is really important, and was really important and gave us maximum impact in relation to the work that we did in the context of the effect of COVID-19 on cancer services. So really that ability to access data rapidly and effectively, but also responsibly, is really key. And the second thing that's very important is that the type of analysis work that we can do in relation to looking at, for example, the projected 5-year survival work. That type of work is really important. And the other thing I think that we've seen is that the ability for us to collaborate is really important, to bring different skill sets to the table to answer particular questions. And we're very open. I showed you 2 examples, collaborating with University College London. We've had other examples where we've been collaborating with the Northern Ireland Cancer Registry. And so really that spirit of collaboration that we bring to the table, as well as the particular skill sets that we have ourselves, I think really make it relevant, not only in the context of COVID and cancer, but also to use this type of approach and these type of expertise to answer other challenges in relation to cancer. In relation to Ed's question, and thanks very much, Ed, yes, in relation to Northern Ireland, first thing, all of the cancer trusts in Northern Ireland contributed to the original data that I presented in relation to the 2-week wait and chemotherapy. So that was great to get all the trusts involved in that. And the other thing to say is that based on that work and also the future work that DataCan did since that, the DataCan has been held up as an exemplar by the Northern Ireland Cancer Recovery Plan, and particularly the digital health strategy in relation to that. So that's really important, and it means we'll be working quite closely with the HSC in terms of how we recover in relation to cancer services, and obviously that's really important for cancer patients. And so both in terms of what we're doing overall, but also what we're doing specifically in Northern Ireland, we're getting a lot of leverage, but also a lot of impact.
Thank you, Mark. Another question here from Dewino, and I think it's a statement, but I think it's also a question as well, which is at the NIHR Clinical Research Networks, we want to use more personal demographic services, primary care, hospital emergency, inpatient and outpatient care, intensive care. Where can we help on this? And I guess that's either for Monica or Mark to address.
Yeah, I mean,
yeah.
Monica, you go first, go on.
Okay. Yeah, no, I mean, that's absolutely, the purpose of what we're trying to do, solve a DataCan, and in particular now with the advent of the cancer TRE, those are all data sets that are actually going to be populated within the cancer TRE. The application process in order to get access is through the existing data access requests. So we have to sort of work within the scope of that. But I put in a chat earlier, sort of as a response to a previous sort of question about, what our sort of plans as DataCan are in order to be able to facilitate that. We see ourselves very much in that sort of central hub kind of role to work with others. So there'll be sort of, we're pulling together an operating framework, so there'll be with different sort of levels of access. The first level will be work that DataCan can do within our existing resources and actually sort of work with others. Secondly would be actual additional partner collaboration. So if there is an opportunity to be able to collaborate, we may sort of need some additional either sort of people resources or financial resources in order to do that, and we would work through that with any potential sort of partnership. And then sort of the third one, if it's such a big thing, then actually it would be out of scope. But we, having been through the process in terms of putting an application for sort of these national data sets, we can provide sort of top tips, help, mop fever browse in order to be able to facilitate that. So I think that's very much sort of our approach that we're taking. We haven't got it all cracked yet, but I'll hand over to Mark if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, no, just to say, I mean, Monica's really captured very well, and we absolutely agree with the areas you've highlighted there. A lot of the ones are the ones that we're highlighting within the TRE as well. But I think it's the importance of being able to work regionally, but also nationally and also UK wide, and it's that scalability that can be very important as well, depending on what the question is that you want to ask. And it obviously reflects, HDR UK's ambition to work at scale so that we can actually do studies that are, in 66 million inhabitants of the United Kingdom. So, there's certainly those opportunities, and we're very open to looking at ways, as Monica said, at different levels that we can work with you. At the end of the day, we want the cancer data to flow. And also, obviously, it's really important that, other associated data, not just cancer data. So we know, obviously, and through what I presented earlier, that comorbidities are also really important. So capturing that data can also be very relevant in the context of cancer.
Thank you, Mark. I think whilst we're a little bit ahead of time, we've got one question from Bruce Burnett, just to put his mind at rest concerning recent social media interest in data sharing. But I think what we'll do is we'll leave that for the next Q&A session and for Chris Carrigan to comment on that, unless there's anything you particularly like to say on that, Mark.
No, I think I would agree. I think we can cover it in the second session.
Okay, right. Thank you very much indeed for that. We'll conclude that, and we'll say we will look to pick up any outstanding questions, but I think Mark and James have been doing sterling work in the Q&A and answering most of them. So it's now time to hand over to Chris Carrigan and the panel. We're going to have a panel discussion here. Now, this isn't the sleepy go bye-bye session. I think it's really worth focusing on what the involvement of patients has meant and what the benefits been to DataCan. So I'm going to hand over to Chris now. Chris.
Yeah, thank you, Pete. Yeah, hopefully this will be of interest to people. We want to run it slightly differently. We've got a few people involved here. I'm going to involve Pete as well. I also want to bring in Jackie Gath, who is another member of our PPI group, and Lauren Brown, who's from Flatiron. My role within DataCan is as the patient involvement lead for DataCan. That doesn't mean that Pete and Jackie do what I say. It's actually the opposite. They basically tell me what to do and I'm there at their behest. And if you want to confirm that, give them a phone call or an email. They'll tell you the same thing. James flagged through some of the work we've done on quite a practical issue with Flatiron. And that's what we really want to examine here. Let me just start by saying, from the patient and public perspective, we know that there's a huge mistrust around the way that commercial organizations want to get access to health data. You've seen it in the press. Bruce flagged a couple of things which I can pick up a bit later. Within DataCan, that's the key issue we want to address head on. So what we've done is we've worked with our patient groups to try and bring them together with organizations who want access to data or indeed who hold data to try and understand what they do and to get some collaborative discussion and get some solutions and recommendations for them and for us to improve the situation all around. So what we wanted to discuss at the minute is in more detail was the work we did with Flatiron. Maybe I should start by letting Lauren, she's lost her earbuds now. Maybe start by letting Lauren just say, Lauren, where are you coming from? What problem were you trying to solve and what caused you to approach DataCan in the first place?
Yeah, I took a tactical decision that these wouldn't last through the panel. Yeah, so I guess just to start off, I know James gave a pretty brief introduction to the work that we've done, but just by way of introduction, so I'm Lauren Brown and I lead Flatiron Health's work in the UK. So Flatiron is a wholly cancer-focused health technology company. So much like DataCan, our one and only priority is cancer. We work with patients, clinicians, and the whole cancer community to create really high-quality cancer data that can be used for high-impact decision-making. Flatiron was founded in New York around a decade ago, and as you heard from James, we've had a small team in the UK for the last year, essentially exploring how Flatiron can have the greatest potential impact for cancer patients in the UK. And a big part of that exploration has been thinking really critically about how we might evolve our approach to the unique needs of the UK, rather than taking what we've done before and shifting it. And to do that, we decided to engage with a range of trusted stakeholders to hear their feedback. And I'm sure it won't surprise anyone here that DataCan, and particularly the DataPan patient group, was one of the first organizations that we connected with. It's been an absolute pleasure working with Chris, Pete, Jackie, and the whole of the team. And essentially the question that we wanted to understand was we wanted to understand how patients perceived Flatiron. So really broadly, all the way from the way we were communicating to the impact that we hoped to have. So how clear is it what to patients and to the broader community what Flatiron does? How clear are the benefits of what we do? How clear are the potential risks and the impact to patients? What kind of concerns do patients have and how might we address those concerns? And something we spent quite a lot of time thinking about was what would really great patient engagement by an organization like Flatiron look like? So not kind of holding us to the bar of what have others done in this space, but really kind of posing to the team right as we started exploring entering the UK, if we were to do this really well, what would it look like to you all? And kind of opening that door for some really valuable dialogue and kind of a two-way feedback.
Thanks, Lauren. So what we did was we got a few people in the room to try and give you those views. I think I should also say that one of the things which DataCan again is unique with is our relationship with a much wider group called Use My Data, which both Pete, Jackie and I are all involved with. And when we try and get a group of patients together, we also bring in others with less experience, less perception, and potentially some conflicting views as well. What you don't want in a conversation is a very one-sided argument. And certainly we didn't get a one-sided argument, as Rowan will say with her smile. So we pulled together a fairly wide range of people and put them in the room with Flatiron to try and understand how Flatiron works and what was the value to patients. So let me just pop across to Jackie. Jackie, from your view, how did the approach we took feel to you from a patient perspective?
Well, initially I was a touch skeptical, I must admit, because industry doesn't really like liaising or having anything to do with actual patients. But this turned into a very high quality dialogue. It was a conversation between equals. And what more can I say?
Yeah, and I think it's fair to reflect as we went through I think we spent about 3 separate sessions over a period of a few weeks going through something in quite a lot of detail. That would it be fair to say the conversation developed from one of skepticism, if you like, to understanding and then calibration in terms of what to do next? Is that fair, Jackie?
Yes, it is. And I think it's a good exemplar for other companies who should really take the same course. It was an excellent exercise and it turned out to have some really good results. I can't speak highly enough of it, really, from a patient point of view.
Yeah, Pete, I'm bringing you in as a participant here. You've given up your chair duties, so I can grill you now. From your perspective, how did this feel to you?
I am certainly, because I've got a commercial background, I was probably a little bit more I'm going to suggest slightly more advanced in my thinking, more open. But even then, I think what was notable was, one, we needed a series of meetings to develop that trust, that sense of understanding each other's agenda and where we were coming from. And initially, whilst we had a briefing session, so we got a series of documents, and I have to say, initially I was a bit, this isn't telling me a lot. This is not getting to the heart of what I want to discuss. And what I want to discuss is what is precisely you're doing, how will that benefit patients, and what about fair value, let alone the data side of it. So there are a lot of questions. And I think what was really good was and I can only recommend this to every group, we had diversity in our group. So we're not just talking ethnicity, we're talking diversity in all sorts of dimensions, whether it's gender, whether it's age, whether it's geographics, some people from the commercial world, some people who only ever worked in public service. And as you've already highlighted, Chris, one person who was very inexperienced about public involvement. But I always make the point that they're the people that are probably closer in terms of the knowledge and the opinions of the person in the street than anybody else. So those people are really valuable. And it was through that process, I think, of chatting amongst ourselves, listening to Lauren and her viewpoint and her other colleagues, that, you start to get a real sense of trust developing. And I think we're at the stage now, because we've had continuing dialogue since then, that I think we're more open than ever we dreamt we would be. And I think that's a real plus. And I'm sure you're coming on to talk about, what happened following those 3 meetings in terms of our recommendations, Chris. So I'm not going to steal your thunder.
Feel free to steal my thunder, Pete. Actually, a few words you mentioned then. One was the preparation. So from a patient perspective, I think we've all had experience where a patient group is pulled together, not given the support and the briefing beforehand, and they feel it can be overwhelming. So I think one thing we have reflected on is the amount of preparation we need to do to set these things up. And then the 2 other words were dialogue, which is understanding the different perspectives, and that development of trust as well. And I think hopefully that's how that felt to you, Lauren.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think something that James said earlier about sort of encouraging people to work on a long-term basis with DataCan, I think worked really well for us here. And it felt like every session that every time that we met, there was more trust on both sides, and we were able to essentially create a really positive feedback loop where as we each sort of built trust and knowledge on both sides, we could be more open on both sides. And it really became, I think, to borrow Jackie or Pete's word, it really felt like a dialogue. We weren't, we were able to really have a conversation rather than talking past each other, rather than us putting up, slides that said what we did and then sort of hearing back from patients. It really felt like we were solving problems together. And I think it's obviously a somewhat vulnerable position to be in on both sides, right? And I think what was really great is, thanks to the way that Chris actually kind of managed and facilitated that, it really felt like we could ask tough questions. And I think I know Pete and Jackie, you certainly put us through our paces. And I think that was exactly what we needed and wanted, right? We really wanted to have that kind of a discussion where we would go away thinking about things really differently, and being really surprised by some of the things that we heard. And that absolutely happened. And I think it was really the kind of format and openness of the discussion that enabled that to happen.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And if there are any in the audience who are thinking about how this process might be useful to them, I think you should listen to those words. It doesn't come without challenge. It's quite difficult. We understand that from an organization to come in and expose what it is they do to a group of patients in quite an open way. But I think what we've demonstrated through this as an example is by doing it in the right way, by working through it methodically and developing that degree of trust and the ability to question from both sides. And I have to say the questions we got back from Lauren and the team into our PPA group for the views we were given initially were just as useful as the questions we went from the patient panelists into Flatiron. So that's something the audience might want to think about. I think this is a model which does fit really well with other organizations. And it's all very well having the discussion, but something needed to come out of it. Lauren, perhaps you want to talk a bit more detail about how you found the results and how it empowered you, if you like, to take certain other actions.
Yeah. I think one of the most useful things for us, because I think we had these really valuable, quite in-depth discussions, and then as we sort of came to the conclusion of those series of workshops, the DataCan team and the PPIE group packaged up essentially a series of recommendations and things for us to think about. And some of them were quite specific, and some of them were almost challenges to us, but they were all really helpfully tangible, and I think really left us with a bit of homework, which I think was the intent. But I think it was really great because it turned a series of discussions into an ongoing stream of work for us. And it's something that we've really been able to, I think something I was really conscious of as we stood up our patient work was that it shouldn't be something that I had thought up or my team had thought up. It actually should be something we should be developing our patient engagement work with the input of patients. And I think a lot of companies don't actually do that. And it's easy to bring patients on once you've already decided what to do. And in this case, we were actually able to decide what to do with patients, which I think has made it feel all the more meaningful, and it's been really valuable to us. So since we started these conversations, we've actually come back to the team and said, okay, here are the things that we talked about last summer, and here are the things that we've done as a result, right? So we're in the middle of recruiting our own patient group. And I think one of the big learnings from this was actually the working on an ongoing basis with the same group really enables that kind of deeper conversation. So by formalizing a group within Flatiron and really working with them over time, we can hopefully have the kind of the same caliber and depth of conversations that we had with you all. And there are a series of other really interesting, I'd say, mix of like challenges and suggestions that I think really helped shape what we've done and what we hope to continue to do. And it was a really, I think, a great way to keep the discussion going and not leave with ambiguity on either side. And then I hope, and I guess a question for you and you both, Pete and Jackie, I hope, at least to me, it felt like a really great accountability mechanism, right? So everyone had given a lot of their time and energy in having these discussions. And I think by leaving with a set of recommendations, it felt like, okay, well, this is really going somewhere. And And I wonder how that felt for you, and kind of creating those recommendations and then sort of seeing where they went from there.
Well, I think, Lauren, it certainly helped focus the mind. What are our recommendations following all of those lengthy discussions? And it was really useful. And we came up with about 16 on a piece of paper. And I guess I can think of a couple of challenges that certainly I posed to you, which were not on the paper. That was great to sort of crystallize precisely what our thinking was. But for me, as a patient representative, the real moment of truth was when you came back at a subsequent PPIE meeting, our patient meeting, and said, and this is what we've done as a consequence. And that for me was that these are people, you know, we can really deal with, and they listen. And as we listen to you, you listen to us, and that's where the real learning comes out of. You know, I remember particularly raising that challenge about empowerment with you. Think about how much you want to empower your patients and precisely what you want them to do for you, and let them know that level of empowerment and what you want them. And they may have a different view of that. And you know, they are really valuable lessons that, you know, particularly I think if you talk to anybody in our patient group, they say they've learned, particularly because of the DataCan culture. And I'm going to bore for England here, because Chris hears me say this at least once a week, which is, you know, the hardest thing as a patient representative is to demonstrate that you can add value to a research team or a research program, and trying to feel out, if you like, your level of empowerment, because it's never discussed. And from day one, that was a given at DataCan, that we were told, this is where we're at, guys. We want you. And in fact, the challenge is almost the other way. We want you to do more.
Yeah.
And that is sometimes a little bit hard to live up to. But it's absolutely so refreshing to receive that message. I mean, I work across 41, I think now, actually, research programs. I think I've heard that once, and that was DataCan. There are a couple of other programs I work on that come close, but the rest is just like nowhere close. So it's so refreshing, which is why I made that challenge to you to think about.
I think also there are learnings for those of us who work in the front line, if you like, on actual research projects, where we can push the, you know, will you make your data of such a quality that we can put it into, that it can be put into the gateway. And but the other learning is, don't have one group of patients looking at the patient information documents, don't have another group of patients on the focus group. Employ your PPI in all aspects of your work, as you have done, and continually, so we get the environment, the context, everything. No, it was a good experience.
And just one thing I would raise as well is it was quite daunting for patients to go into a room with a large multinational organization, as an example, or any other commercial user of data, and feel as if they can have a conversation at the right level. And one thing we've done within DataCan over a period of many months is invest significantly in supporting our PPI members to have that conversation. For instance, we do fortnightly drop-in sessions on a specific topic, which we cover in detail around data. Those were recorded and made available through, now increasingly through the NCRI consumers, as well as we build a wider network, and through Use My Data members as well to widen that network still. And I think it's a recognition that you need to give people enough information to have a detailed conversation without feeling overawed by a lead clinician or a head academic. And that takes time to build up. And I think it's that sort of resource that we built within DataCan and now begin to expand out to other areas, which I think could be increasingly useful. Do you think that would be fair, Lauren?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think there's a piece of this, which is the sort of culture of DataCan, and then there's a piece of it which is more scalability, right? So there's kind of what's the norms that we set as a team, and I think so much of what Jackie and Pete both said around feeling empowered comes down to the well, Chris, to you and the rest of the team at DataCan who've made that possible, and who have said right from the beginning that this is going to be really substantive patient engagement. And there's, you know, it's going to be, the default is always that the patients have a decision, right? And it's not, if we haven't given you an explicit permission, it's really kind of flipping that on its head. And so I think that's that's certainly a piece of it, the kind of the culture of the organization, the norms that you set. But then a lot of it, as you said, is also how do you make sure that people have almost on-ramps to this, right? So we're not just hearing from the same patients who feel really comfortable with data and making decisions around data. You're giving new patients who might feel less comfortable or less like they have the lingo around it. You're giving them a way to engage and engage as meaningfully as someone who's been, you know, becoming a professional patient for 10 years. And I think that was something that we thought was really valuable. And as you said, the people who are newest to patient engagement around data are likely the most representative of the public. Most people don't think about this day in, day out. And I think sometimes we can, we can hear a bit of an echo chamber, and really saying that let's open this dialogue as broad as we can, and then give people the resources to meaningfully engage, so that you're not just kind of tokenistically opening the door, that everyone at that table or on that Zoom call, as it were, it was last year, has the same sort of chance to use their voice and the same likelihood of challenging an organization like Flatiron. And so, yeah, as we've thought about where to build on this work, one of the things that we thought about with Chris and the rest of the team is how might some of those kind of educational resources that help patients kind of come up the learning curve on engaging on data and with commercial organizations, how might those be shared more broadly through DataCan's network and beyond? Because that really is, I think someone asked a really good question around how do we have essentially a more, I'm slightly paraphrasing the question, but how do we have a more productive conversation around the ways that health data is used? And I think some of that has to be really kind of transparently engaging the community and being really clear that input is welcome, and then actually kind of following through to not just say, sure, we'd love to hear from you, but actually we'll help you get over that initial hump. And I think the onus is on commercial organizations to support that as well. And at least I think from my perspective, we've gained so much by the engagement with DataCan and with the patient group that it seems only right to follow through and think about how do we scale that more broadly. I think you probably heard from all of us, but it was a fairly time-intensive process. It's so valuable, but really thinking about, okay, well, how might some of those tools be packaged up and scaled beyond our two teams? Because I think this is actually a really generalizable approach that lots of organizations could take.
Indeed, and there are several organisations who are really interested in the model as well. So IQVIA are one of our partners, and they've already done some work with us in these areas as well. So I think that's where the patient group can work agnostic of any one organisation, but begin to build that community trust to demonstrate that organisations who do use our data can do so in a trustful way. Yeah. So let me just end. I'm conscious of time. Just end with one thought. I suppose we will have people on the call here who work in other commercial organisations who probably have got their own patient involvement groups. Why should they bother coming to talk to us? Let me start with maybe Pete first, because he's due a challenging question, isn't he?
Thank you very much indeed, Chris. Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. And I think it's not a question of us telling you what to do. I think it's a question of us telling you what we did in nice bite-sized chunks that somebody can take away and then decide, right, okay, chunks 1, 3, and 5, no, it won't work here for whatever reason that might be. But chunks 2, whatever the number it was, 4 and 7, I can definitely use that. Maybe I might need to tweak 1 or 2 of those. So I think for me, that would be the approach we'd need to be taking. And I think that would be helpful. Again, it's not a one size fits all type of thing. You know, you have to scale these things according to your organization and really the size of your PPI group. But I think that's the approach. And I think there are other things that we're starting now, as we talked about, to develop materials, templates, etc., based on our experiences that again would be valuable. Again, I'm not always saying they're the finished product, but again, it's a start. And I think that's what I would say. That would be my message of what our approach would be. Yeah, I guess over to you, Jackie, really, for your thoughts.
Yes, I would agree. I would like excellently explained, Pete, as always. I think there is room for the hubs and for industry to cooperate here and to adopt the same sort of standards, the same sort of protocols, the same sort of approach to equality and diversity in research and analysis of the data sets for differences in response to drugs and diagnosis and long-term effects. So I think there's a lot of opportunity here that we can take advantage of.
Jackie, and just to polish that off, if you question whether our group are empowered or not, there was a different organization, quite a small organization, who came. They had a particular problem with a big data controller refusing access to data to them. They explained their case to our group in quite a short space of time, and our group decided, without me, to write to the data controller and ask the question, could you explain why this application has been refused? So they are very active. They will question, but they can also be proactive and helpful as well as a group. They're good people. So I think we need to draw that to a whole. I'd like to thank all of the panelists here, particularly Lauren, because she's supposed to be on holiday today, and I'm sorry about that, Lauren.
This is a great way to spend the time. It's very nice to be back.
But thank you to
Thanks,
all.
Lauren.
And I think I need to hang back to my chair and ex-panelist Pete.
Right, thank you, Mr. Carrigan. Right, okay, don't go over time next time. Okay, right. Sorry, thank you, Jackie. Yeah. So I think we've now got our second Q&A session, and I think what I'd like to ask before we get any more questions is maybe I could involve James, because what we're starting to realise, as Chris mentioned, there's a bit of a demand out there for this sort of consultative approach. And as our commercial director, James, I just wonder if you'd like to sort of reflect on how you found it and whether it's useful to you as part of your, if you like, your product portfolio.
Well, thanks, Pete. It's both essential and useful because we can't be, as DataCan, making decisions about commercial data access without patients. And I mean, I've got a background in management consultancy, so we do a lot of consultations. And what I really wanted to do was to make the consultation of consultation of patients as professional and as well organized as it would be in any other consultation. So it's not a kind of flash up 25 slides and say, what do you think, with the 5 minutes at the end of it. I think the approach we've got, which is that patients are in control, and therefore we need to have a mechanism for them to exercise their control over commercial data access. That was really where we came from. So frankly, it's much harder to do that than the lip service engagement. And it just does take time, and it is occasionally you don't know what's going to come out of the room, and it's unexpected, and all credit to all the companies and the rest who've done it. It's harder to do, but you can do it. I think that's the really critical bit. You need to resource it, you need to do it well, you need to be prepared to listen, but you can do it. And I hope what people have heard today is that it's both feasible to get that patient view in, but it's also really important to commercial and anybody else, frankly, getting access to NHS health data. It is vital that the patients not only are kind of aware of what you're doing, but are driving what you're doing and giving you explicit permission to do it.
Okay, thanks, James. So I've got 3 other questions that have come for some reason direct to me, so I'm going to pose those. And I want to Monica, if I may do, Monica. Question was, when will the National Cancer TRE be operational? And what's the process by which I can access this data?
Thanks, Pete. Yeah. So in terms of it being operational, it exists already. The TRE is being used by the cardiovascular hub. In terms of the cancer one, as I mentioned in my presentation, it's literally any day now. We have the processes through joint controller data sharing agreements. Those have been signed off now, both by the Chief Medical Officer at Leeds Teaching Hospital Trust and the Exec Dean for Medicine and Health at the University of Leeds. So our framework arrangement with NHS Digital is good to go. We think, you know, once we actually get access to the system, and we've essentially we're paying for 5 user licenses, and as it was sort of mentioned in the chat, this is not a cheap thing. However, if you look at the amount of work that actually needs to be done in order to curate these data, bring them together and host them on an environment, then actually in a way that really has never been done before, and is probably as rich a source of you know, pseudonymized data as anything else in the UK, possibly even sort of globally. It is very much sort of value for money, and providing that fair value back to the NHS, which is something that we at DataCan, absolutely stress it is important. In terms of other organisations being able to access that, once again, I put in the chat sort of, we're pulling together a 3-stage sort of operating model, those things that we feel that we can actually do both for ourselves and on behalf of others with our existing funding that comes from HDR UK. Those things that actually are a natural extension of our HDR UK work, and we can bring in other sort of partners, either adding those as additional data controllers onto our existing application, or potentially setting up a partnership and providing honorary contracts to work under the umbrella of the 2 leads organisations. It may be that, folks, it's another project so large that actually and it doesn't fall within the remit of our core business or even our extended business, but also, once again, with our sort of principle and mantra around sort of helping to improve access and infrastructure to healthcare data, we can provide essentially consultancy services sort of around that as well. Initially, this is not for commercial use. So the DARS application that has gone through at the moment, NHS Digital are starting to think about, what a commercial model could look like. But bearing in mind the panel conversation that we've just had with the PPIE group and with Lauren, that there's a lot of work to be done sort of around that. So yeah, that's essentially sort of where we're up to and what's happening.
Thank you very much. And I'm going to link 2 of the questions and throw these open to anybody, really. And these are just to why and how can NHS organisations work with DataCan? And pretty much the same question came through, but just in relation to academic or research groups. So who would like to start me off on that one?
I'll take the research group question. Like, we have a lot of collaborations with different research groups, so come and talk to us and we look and see what's possible in terms of, as I indicated a few in our presentation, but there are many other research groups that we're interacting with. And so come and chat to us and we can see what's possible. So very much open to discussions on that.
Yeah, and then from a data sort of perspective, I've actually put the link in to our DataCan datasets in the chat. All of the metadata is there and sort of described. I would encourage folks to have a look at that. There is an automated data request sort of function through the gateway that actually then comes to us, and we can have sort of follow-up engagement and discussions around sort of, what is the art of the possible. And we've got plenty of sort of experience now as to working with other organizations. So that's a very clear sort of process. There is also a whole set of tooling now starting to come on board. If you haven't actually got an HDR UK Gateway account, you can either sign on through your, if you're an academic, through your own institution's sort of Opens Athens account, or you can create one, and then you'll get a whole set of additional functionality and tooling behind the scenes. But as Mark says, just ask the question, reach out to us, and very happy to have those follow-up conversations.
Right.
I think,
Charlie,
with regards to NHS organisations, we're already demonstrating that our real-time data network has the potential for organisations both to develop insights from their own data, but also to look at unwanted variation by comparing their data to other trusts. So we're very keen for trusts across the UK to join our real-time data network.
splendid. Okay, good messages. Right, thank you very much indeed, everybody. I think it's time to move on to our concluding session, which quite by chance is handing over again to Charlie, who's going to summarise the key messages from this seminar and close the seminar. Thank you, Charlie.
Thanks, Pete, and just like to say thank you for wonderful chairing and keeping us all to time. I hope, our aim for this session really was to make sure that people had an understanding about what the aims of DataCan are and how we hope to develop. We're a relatively young organisation, having been here for 18 months, but it's, I think, evident from the work that we've described that we're highly ambitious and that I think there's a lot that we can do. So we heard from a number of speakers. Mark Lawler, our scientific director, talked, I think, very impressively about the direct and indirect effect of COVID and how our access to near real-time data was able to show the impact there. And on the basis of some of those findings, that's had impact both at a policy level in the UK, but has led to the work that we've been doing around expanding our real-time data network and also how we can use assets such as the Cancer Trusted Research Environment. And Monica Jones, our Chief Data Officer, I think demonstrated how this can really be an asset that we can develop and really develop a community of interest around data. But it has to be done in an environment that is both safe and trusted. And working in combination with HDR UK and other organisations, I think that we at DataCan would be able to facilitate the use of data much more meaningfully. And I think also there are potentials for us to develop training capacity and capability for data use, which is also something that's greatly needed across the NHS and beyond. We heard from James Peach, our commercial director, about some examples of industry partnership and the triple negative breast cancer work that we've done with Roche. And this was a piece of work that we were able to turn around extremely rapidly, and to take data from 2 different organisations in different countries and to come up with meaningful results, I think was quite a remarkable achievement that not many organisations would be able to undertake. The word that's been used quite frequently throughout much of the conversation and the questions is around trust, and maintaining trust is absolutely critical to what we do and what others can do with data. And I have to say that I thought that the conversation between Lauren, Jackie, Pete and Chris was frankly wonderful, because I think what it showed is that we have been able to create a culture of inclusivity at DataCan, where patients are very much leading the agenda. I've been an NHS clinician for 35 years. I know how really difficult it is to have an organisation which has patients at the centre of decision making. And partly the reason for that is that if you decide to go down that route where patients are very much front and centre, you have to be prepared to follow the direction that they take you in. So you have to be prepared to do things that you, as a clinician or coming from another background, might not necessarily have wanted to go in. But actually, when you trust the patients and recognise that what they're doing for individuals and for populations, you recognise that much more can be done. And I feel immensely proud, like all my other colleagues, that the patient public group essentially creates the direction of travel in which DataCan is going. We see ourselves very much as a sustainable organisation. We want to be part of the data landscape for the foreseeable future. But the only way that we can do that in trying to tackle these very difficult and complex issues is by having a growing community which we can work with as many people as possible. So this is really a plea for everyone on the call, both to contact us so that we can try to have a dialogue with you, so that we can help to grow with you in making data something that's much better for the outcome of our cancer patients going forward. So thank you all very much for joining and being part of this webinar this afternoon.